Why do you think people float this idea, David? Why do you think every couple of years the idea comes back up?
It's the old line. I remember a study I read about Pittsburgh and St. Louis many years ago, and the conclusion, and the question was, are the St. Louis and Pittsburgh areas really inefficient with all the fragmented government? And the conclusion was, well, you would never design a metro area like this, but they've sort of both made it work over the last century better than you would think. And the conclusion was they're not. St. Louis and Pittsburgh aren't actually as inefficient when you run the numbers as you might assume they are. And I think people have trouble accepting that. I think people look at so many small municipalities, many of them are dysfunctional. Many of them, until recent times, funded themselves primarily with traffic tickets, which is a terrible way to fund local government. And that's not even an exaggeration. And there's a lot of problems with it. And there's just this whole fundamental belief that if I can just plan it better, we'll create a better spot. And I just think it fails. And one of the reasons it would fail, and I say this, I'm talking the whole huge merger. There's all sorts of ways we can work together and share services and that. But one of the ways it would fail would be to get right back to what Aaron led this conversation off with, in that if St. Louis County and St. Louis City join together much more, they're not actually going to lay any government employees off to save any money. And St. Louis City government is going to say, all right, well,
My work is done.
time to fire
New York City,
employees.
large governments are not
It's never
efficient,
going to
more
happen.
efficient.
So you're not going to save
Yeah.
any money, and it's all just going to collapse.
Yeah, I think, I look at it and I say, look, I think merger is a solution for failed states, if you want to call them that, in the St. Louis suburbs. Take some microburb that's a complete scam or is bankrupt and kind of merge it in with its neighbor. Do some consolidation like that probably needs to be led by state government, almost like a receivership sort of thing. So that's just kind of like good governance as you deal through it. But I just don't think that the benefits you would gain from trying to do like a complete governmental merger of St. Louis City with St. Louis County would outweigh the opportunity cost of how much time and effort you spend on it that you could be spending on other things that I think will move the needle more. And secondly, so that's number one. The downsides are arguably as high as the upsides. There's no guarantee it's even in that negative, even in that positive in this environment. The time to have merged was when Indianapolis did it in 1970, not in 2026. And then I think Nashville even did it in the 60s. Jacksonville did it a long time ago. And then I think, it doesn't fix the fundamental issues around the culture, which I think you got to kind of take a hard look at that and say,
And what do you mean?
maybe impossible to change, but I
Tell
think,
me more about that.
well, just the idea that people who aren't from here have to be able to move here and get connected and feel like they belong in the city. And there's a couple we know who lived in St. Louis. The wife taught in St. Louis public schools. They're big kind of urban people. Husband was from St. Louis, and they moved here to Carmel, Indiana. Okay, so these are just people one of the spouses native from St. Louis. Basically man, people are just so much friendlier here. They make better eye contact. They engage more. It's just so much more welcoming here than it was even in St. Louis, even though we were actually in a sense connected because the husband was from there and we were. So I think there is, when even people who lived in St. Louis and liked it when they lived there, they didn't hate it, but they notice a difference when they leave. And that is a killer when you're already struggling demographically. I had a guy who owned a business in Cleveland, and he said to me one time, he's like, I learned the hard way never to recruit anyone from out of town to work for my company unless that person or their spouse is from Cleveland, because otherwise they will never stay. And, when that's where you are as a place, that is just rough.